Hi gang, Rob here. It is the evening of 29 July 2019. Coming to you today with a video that's been percolating within me for, over a month, and it's a very hard video for me to make. First of all, because I'm going to say some things about people that are less than flattering. I'm not going to name anyone. But it's difficult and it needs to be said. Second reason it's difficult is that it's made me sort of take a look at my role and the roles of others like me who review things on the internet, specifically on YouTube, who sit in some form or another in judgment of the products people make. It's not a very flattering look in the mirror for both myself and for the population of people who do what I do, specifically in the knife community. So what I'm going to talk about today, those of you who are aware that this has been going on will know what I'm talking about. Those of you who haven't caught wind of it probably need to know about it, because you will catch wind of it, I believe, because I don't think it's over. Some months ago, a relatively new YouTube channel and its operator, who must be a member of some online forum of knife collectors, decided himself and with a group of people he's associated with on social media that there was enough suspicion among the knife collecting community regarding steels, heat treats, hardnesses that companies were producing and selling, that they needed to appoint themselves as the arbiters of what is right, and the staff of the official internet knife blade testing community. Now, just from what I can glean based on videos I've watched and social media threads that I've read and have had read to me by people who have contacted me about this issue over the last couple months. Although these guys are collectors and evidently passionate collectors, to my knowledge, none of them has any documented expertise or experience in the field of metrology, of statistical process control, of any kind of scientific analysis of a data set, metal processing experience or expertise, any of it. I know that it started with a collector who operates a YouTube channel and some guys he's associated with. He was interested in doing some hardness testing and verification of steel type, and somebody in a social media thread said, "Hey, I work at a steel processing plant, and I don't do this in the plant, but I know we got a lab that has testing equipment. Maybe if you send me some stuff, I could, go in there and test it." So a guy who works in another area of a steel processing plant, who knows that company does hardness testing and chemical analysis of some kind, which is, by the way, kind of rudimentary. He's going to go into the lab, and with no training or very little training, he's going to use their equipment. He's going to make some hardness tests. He's going to shoot some lasers at some steels and verify material composition. And then they're all going to put this in a spreadsheet and they're going to publish it. Well, they sort of touched off a firestorm, and very pridefully so. Just from what I can tell by said YouTube channel operator and the way he presents himself in his videos, he did so, he made contact with knife companies in a sort of by his own account, in a way that would have been off-putting to me if I owned a Lion Steel or Benchmade or Spyderco. And this is the part that made me really take stock in and do a little personal inventory in how I have come across as a knife reviewer and how knife reviewers come across in general. Before I back up and give you a little context, I want to tell you that most of the work that this group has done has already been proven to be faulty data. Third-party testing has taken place. Evaluation of their test methods has taken place, and it's proven to be unreliable. So although their spreadsheet looks really nice, and although the hardness testing data presented on the company's letterhead where the guy works, I'm sure they're really happy about that, the methods are suspect. In fact, they've been proven to be not correct. So why did I get involved in this? A couple of the people who are subscribers to my channel and guys that I correspond with online know that I have a background in quality assurance and heat treating. So here's how that goes. I'm going to explain to you my level of expertise first. Then I'm going to explain to you why on my channel I've never talked about this. Okay, so here's the deal. Before I became a car salesman at the age of 30-ish, I spent 12 years in the field of quality assurance and quality engineering, most of it in the heat treat industry. So my summer job while I was a senior in high school and for a couple of years of college was as a quality assurance inspector in a heat treat. Then I sort of tailored my education to correspond with that and continue that. When I left college, I became a process engineer and a quality engineer. So my fields of expertise were heat treating and metallurgy, quality engineering, process engineering, process design, failure mode effects analysis, statistical process control, statistical quality control, calibration and metrology. Most of it relating to heat treating. And the lion's share of testing that takes place in a heat treat environment is hardness testing. Just to give you some idea what I've done there. You know, when I was an inspector, on a normal shift of my workday, doing hardness testing, somewhere between 8 and 1,200 hardness impressions a day were taken by me in a normal day. To give you an idea how that works, and I'm going to interject from this current dust up. One of the guys involved in the knife steal police, I'm going to call them, made a comment in a discussion thread about methods of hardness testing. And I don't have the quote, but just here's my paraphrase. Will give you a gist of what he meant. Any little kid with a half an hour of experience at a hardness tester can make reliable hardness impressions and get reliable, accurate readings. Completely false. Completely false. One of the things I did as an inspector in a heat treat many years ago was not only did I have to prepare, and test my own samples, I also was responsible for going behind machine operators who had to cut samples and make hardness tests. I had to retest their samples to make sure the data they were recording was correct. So let's say I did 1,000 hardness tests a day. Those guys each machine operator did 50 or 60. So my level of expertise was 1,000 a day, or my level of experience, theirs was 50 or 60. Without fail, every hour checking operator samples across the board, I found mistakes that operators made, either with sample preparation or with actual readings that they took. So to say that a little kid with 30 minutes of training and experience can accurately and reliably make hardness tests on a Rockwell tester is pridefully ignorant at best. And that statement was made by somebody who I don't think had ever made a hardness test in his life, but if so, not very many. He didn't know what he was talking about. And most of the most of the things presented as fact, both on video and in documentation by this group, although the presentation looks and sounds slick, it's completely worthless data. Here's why I've never talked about this stuff on my channel. And guys, I have lots of experience with this stuff. It's old experience, but the technology hasn't changed a lot. First of all, here's why. I know that when you're testing the hardness on a knife blade, first of all, there are just too many variables in the testing process for hardness on a knife blade for me to be able to share anything of value. I don't have an adequate sample size. I don't have current calibrated test equipment. I don't have ways to prepare samples to make accurate tests, and I don't know enough about the processes by which those knife blades are produced to know how and where to test them. For instance, here is a Benchmade bug out. You can see there are extremely small parallel flats on this knife. They're kind of right here in front of the thumb stud. And then if you release the blade, there's some flat behind the thumb stud. So if you took this thumb stud out and you used the proper anvil on your Rockwell hardness tester, you'd find two nice parallel flats to test. But there are a couple problems, aren't there? There are a couple problems. First of all, there's a pivot hole right here. There is a thumb stud hole right here. Who knows what was done post heat treat in the locations of those two holes? Maybe the pivot hole had to be reamed. Maybe the thumb stud hole was such a tight fit that some after tempering was done in specific locations on this knife blade to make those holes easier to finish and make thumb studs not crack knife blades. Who knows, maybe they even softened the tang to make the knife easy to straighten after assembly. We have no idea. And these two parallel flats right here are the only place we can test the knife. For those of you who don't know what we're talking about, we're making hardness tests. I'm going to throw some pictures up. First, here are a couple pictures of old school Rockwell hardness testers. So a Rockwell hardness tester is essentially a machine that, by making an impression with a diamond indenter or penetrator and measuring the distance which it travels into steel with a given load, how hard it is, and there's a corresponding scale that goes with the measured distance. So here are a couple pictures of old school manual Rockwell hardness testers, and then I'm going to throw one up of more modern digital tester with internal weight adjustment. And then you're going to see next pictures of some anvils. First is a Rockwell anvil that you're going to lay your sample on that's large and flat. This is something that you'd use to test like bolts and screws. Small part, big anvil. Next is a V-shaped anvil that you would use to test hardness on a round cylindrical section of steel. And then next is what's called a spot anvil or a pin anvil that you would use to test something like a knife blade. What you want to make sure of when you're using an anvil, you want to pick the correct one for the part so that you get a dead solid meeting between the base of that part and the anvil. Like for instance, you wouldn't want to use that large flat anvil with a large thin flat piece of steel that might have warpage in it, because when the major load of the Rockwell tester comes down, it's going to read straightening out the warpage rather than it would the actual hardness of the steel, which is possible in a knife blade. Which is why you're going to want to use that pin anvil or spot anvil. That presents its own set of problems, because you want to make sure, as you have that blade in the Rockwell tester, here's your anvil, you want to make sure you're not moving it So that when you set the preload on your Rockwell tester, you want to make sure everything's good and solid. And this takes a little bit of touch. A 6-year-old with half an hour of training can't do it reliably. And then here's a picture of the actual indenter, which is an industrial diamond machined to a specific dimension and angle that's going to penetrate that steel. Next is a little chart of how a Rockwell test works. So that penetrator is placed on the steel and it's cranked up manually to a preload weight, and then the gauge or the scale on the machine is adjusted to 0, and then the 150 kilogram load, if you're using the Rockwell C scale, is released, and the machine then is going to measure the distance between how far it penetrated on preload and how far it penetrated when the major load was applied, and that's going to give you a hardness reading. Okay, it sounds kind of complicated, doesn't it? Because it is. There are all kinds of rules that you have to follow also doing this testing, like what's the minimum thickness of a piece of steel that can be tested on a given scale? If I'm going to make more than one impression in an area, how far apart do those impressions have to be to ensure I'm getting accurate readings? Let's say I test this little small area of parallel flats on this knife blade, and I take 3 readings in a given area, and they're all far enough apart to be accurate. But let's say I get one reading at 59.5, I get one reading at 60, and I get one reading at 53. Am I going to record all 3 of those readings? No. Obviously, my knife blade didn't vary in hardness 7 points within a 3/16 inch area. My 53 was erroneous. In hardness testing, you can get false soft readings. You really can't get false hard readings. So if I got a 59.5 and a 60 and a 53, I'm going to record the 60. That's proper protocol for hardness testing. The guys that are publishing this hardness data have no idea of any of this. They might be getting an idea now, as they've had some third-party testing done and had things explained to them. They still have no idea whether this area of the knives they're testing is actually supposed to be hard. In the case of one of the manufacturers they tested that they really stepped in it with, there is no post-heat treat tempering in any given area, so that's not an issue, but it could have been. They had no idea. But the reason that I haven't done any Rockwell hardness testing or published any data on my channel is because I don't have access to the right equipment or a proper sample size that I know has been taken properly in order to do any testing that means anything. Instead, I defer to companies and people who have made it their craft to produce hardened steel knife blades. Have I seen them make mistakes? Yes, but do I believe that Kershaw Zero Tolerance, Benchmade, Spyderco, Peters Heat Treat, do I believe they know how to produce a blade that's between 59 and 60 Rockwell when they publish the specification 59 to 60 Rockwell? Yes, I do. Doesn't mean that all their blades will be. You know, are they gonna throw away a lot of 500 blades that ran in a batch that's half a point soft? Probably not, because frankly, rework on something as intricately machined as a knife blade might cause more problems getting that extra half a point than it would solve in the real world by getting that extra half a point. I'm talking about warpage, I'm talking about decarburization, dimensional problems. And frankly, when it comes to the world of knife collecting, to quote Sting from the mid-'80s of the Police, it's all just mental masturbation. And why this group of collectors felt themselves to be so self-important that they had to go out and expose knife companies who were fraudulently selling knife blades that were either the wrong steel or of the wrong hardness is beyond me. I don't think any of these guys were professionals in any of the fields they're testing. Now, after their hardness data kind of got exposed as being bad data, a long apology was issued by the guy that operates the YouTube channel. Interesting apology, though. It wasn't an apology for pridefully inserting themselves in areas they knew nothing about. It was an apology for not being in an appropriate level of communication with the knife companies of whom they were sitting in judgment. It never occurred to them that maybe they crossed into an area that really wasn't their area to be in, or that they had any business feeling like they were arbiters of. I still don't get it. He vowed that their testing would go on in other forms and that they would promise to be in better contact with knife manufacturers before they published data. He's talking about now doing scratch tests instead of Rockwell hardness tests, and I don't know. The point is, guys, 98% of the knives that our online knife collecting and knife nut community buys never get used, especially expensive knives. And then at least they never get used enough to expose 1 point of Rockwell hardness, right? It's mental masturbation is an amazing term. It's amazingly accurate for what we're talking about here. Our crew of arbiters of knife quality have decided that they're going to do cut tests. So they're going to hold knives in human hands like this and start making cuts through dirty, contaminated, inconsistent sisal rope, and they're going to start publishing data with more variables than I can even conceive of. It presents another interesting question, doesn't it? Which is correct? Tightly controlled cutting motions in media that is consistent and pristine, or human hands twisting knife blades through dirty, nasty, inconsistent sisal rope? Which one's a better test? Well, I don't know. There's a reason I don't do cut tests too. There's a reason when I share with you my insights about edge retention, I just talk about how a knife works as I carry it for several weeks or a month, my perceived level of edge retention based on my daily usage versus other knives that I've used. It's anecdotal and it's real world, and I don't get my panties in too much of a wad about it. I can perceive subtle differences. I can tell you which knife steels from which companies are chippier than others, which ones seem to, in my real world life, hold edges longer than others. But I don't ever get real hung up on any of that, if you notice, because it's not really that reliable. It's anecdotal, it's not scientific, and I have no statistical samples. So I guess that's about all I had to say about this. I haven't named names on purpose, but if you're watching this video and you're affiliated with the group I'm talking about, take a step back, please. Just take a step back and have a little respect for the people who we patronize, whose products we love, and understand that they kind of know what they're doing. Not that every knife maker I've ever come in contact with knew anything about heat treating. I've spent some time with some custom makers who had nasty, dusty old hardness testers laying around that they picked up at an auction somewhere, and they have really no idea how to use them. It makes me snicker. But the companies we're talking about here are large production knife companies with great technology and great heat treat suppliers who know how to heat treat knife steel. And for a Keystone Cops bunch of internet knife reviewers to step in and second guess what they're doing is kind of beyond ridiculous. back to my original concern about myself and the population of knife reviewers. Um, it kind of makes me hesitant to review knives. And if you guys have noticed, I haven't done a lot of knife reviews in the last year. And the ones I have done have been on knives that I like. I'm kind of done picking people's work apart. Those of you who are long-term viewers on this channel, you kind of know my philosophy on what makes a good knife a good knife. And if something new comes out, there's probably enough of my data that's already in place for you to be able to comparatively analyze a new model and know what I probably think about it. If you've sent me a knife to sharpen and do a video on and you've seen no video, you probably know what I think. But you know, as my time as a knife reviewer has brought me into contact with more and more people who are involved in actually making knives for a living, I've become more and more hesitant to say negative things about them. Because the fact is, they know more about it than I do. That's all for this one. I hope my rambling has made some bit of sense to you guys. Grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. And remember, the word is sharp.